I mean, I want to just stick my face in it right now, but I'd singe my tongue, so not a good idea. MicroMangia, courageous cooking in a craft kitchen. We are all still quarantining at home, and I've noticed a lot of people are trying to make bread. What if you don't have a bread machine or a standing mixer or a lot of space? A friend of mine said, please, Laura, show me how to make focaccia. I'm gonna show you a technique that you don't see online because this is something I learned in school. We're going to hand make the focaccia, not using a machine, and we're gonna use something called a biga, which is a pre-ferment that makes a very spongy, soft, delicious focaccia. But we have to start this the night before we wanna cook. Tomorrow I want to make focaccia, so tonight I am going to begin with my biga. Now a biga is an Italian word for a pre-ferment, which is not really a starter. A starter is a sourdough mixed with wild yeast. A biga is a sponge made with water, flour, and yeast. And what it does is it creates this sponge with lots of yeast and flavor, and if you like bakery bread, this is how you make bakery bread at home. You start with a biga. To make your biga, you need a glass, ceramic, or plastic bowl. Don't use metal. Metal inhibits yeast growth. I'm also using a wooden spoon and a plastic spatula. Simple. Water goes in the bowl. Yeast goes in the bowl. Flour goes in the bowl. And you just mix it together. Whoops. And it's gonna be a little stiff, but that's okay. I'm gonna put my little biga to bed for the night. Room temp, not in the refrigerator, not in a window where there's too much light, covered so the flies don't land on it. And we shall see each other in about 12 or 18 hours. Wait till you see how big she is. Look at our biga. It's all spongy and happy. It smells like a brewery, as it should. I also have water I have malt syrup, but you can use honey, yeast, salt, olive oil, bread flour. But you could also use AP flour. Whatever you got, that's what you use. All right, we put our water and malt syrup or honey into a bowl. Now this water is about 90 degrees, so it's just a little warm. Your fingers are 98.6 degrees, so touch the water, a little warm. If you have a thermometer, you can use it. You don't want it over 110 degrees because that will kill the yeast. Next, we're gonna add another bit of yeast. It's getting all happy. Then we're gonna put our biga. Just scrape her in. She's very liquidy. Smells like Milwaukee, you know, where they make beer. We're gonna break this up as much as we can in the water. Now I'm gonna add the olive oil. Then the flour. The last thing we're gonna add is the salt. Salt inhibits yeast growth, not, to the point where you can't use it. You have to use salt in bread, but it inhibits the growth of the yeast. And lots of times in school, we would actually let the dough do a 10 or 15 minute rest before we added the salt. But it's not necessary right now. All right, that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna add the salt. Ding. It's a very, very shaggy dough, which is good. Focaccia is about 55% moisture. That's what makes it light and airy and full of delicious holes. It's always good to have two spatulas, one to scrape off the other. Covering up our dough with some plastic wrap, and it's gonna rest for 30 minutes, but every 10 minutes in that 30 minutes, we're gonna do something called a stretch and fold, which is to develop the gluten. Now, if you had a machine, this is the time you might put it in a dough machine with a dough hook to develop the gluten. But this method is a stretch and fold hand mix method. It makes a much lighter, airier, fluffier dough. And make sure you've got your dough in a non-metallic bowl. You can use glass, you can use plastic, you can use ceramic. I'm using this gorgeous old bowl. I gotta clean myself up. I'll see you in 10 minutes. fluffy and growing. Now, what you're gonna do is you're gonna generously flour your surface and flour your hands, because this is a very sticky, wet dough. We're gonna put it out on the board. If you don't have one of these bowl scrapers, it might be a good investment. They're not very much money, a couple of bucks, because they really help with making dough. Now, I'm gonna take more flour, put it on the dough, and we're stretching and folding. Stretching and folding. More flour on my hands. I'm gonna stretch and fold in the other direction. Stretch and fold. And we're gonna put her back in the bowl, but I'm gonna throw a little more olive oil in there, because focaccia loves olive oil. Back in the bowl. Cover it back up. And another 10 minutes rest, and then another stretch and fold. While my dough is resting, I'm gonna caramelize onions. Now, if you've been watching my videos, you know how to caramelize onions, because we did this for French onion soup. You want it on a low, slow heat for about 15 or 20 minutes. You can also chop olives. I'm gonna chop some Kalamata olives. I'm gonna put some fresh rosemary, but if you don't like those things, you could just do flaked salt. You could do Asiago cheese. You could do Parmesan cheese. Whatever you love, whatever you have. I have some za'atar. I might try that, but not with the olives and the rosemary. That's, It's time for stretch and fold number 2. Now my onions are caramelizing, and look, the dough is starting to have a little more structure. So the stretch and fold is a very gentle way to build structure in the dough. She's still really wet. I'm gonna add some more flour on top. Stretch and fold. When I did this in school, we made like bread for, 3 restaurants. So it was in a vat this huge, and 300 loaves of this bread. I want to put more olive oil in the bowl. Put her back into the bowl. Cover up, and another 10-minute rest. The onions are doing their thing. They're caramelizing. I'm gonna chop some olives, because I like olives and onions and rosemary on my focaccia. We're waiting for the next stretch and fold. Now, you might be tempted to knead the dough, because you think, oh, I gotta knead this dough. But the whole magic of focaccia and the hand stretch and fold method is that we're being gentle on the dough, and we're developing the gluten while keeping all that beautiful air that's growing in there intact, because that way you get a nice, light, fluffy, open crumb structure on your focaccia. You can see how the dough has gotten much more structure, but still very moist and airy. More flour, stretch and fold, stretch and fold. So we go from one side to the other, stretch and fold, more oil in the bowl. Put that baby back in there. Now, the dough needs to rest for 30 minutes. When we get back, this dough is gonna be ready to shape. The dough has been rising for another 30 minutes, getting very happy, full of air. Now, I'm gonna use a half sheet pan that I've lined with parchment paper, more olive oil. If you don't have parchment paper, you could use a silicone sheet. If you don't have either of those things, just put a ton more olive oil on your sheet pan, because focaccia loves olive oil. Now, we're gonna shape this very gently. Look at how beautiful it is. You don't wanna be harsh on the dough, because you wanna leave all those beautiful air bubbles. So we're gonna just gently stretch, stretch. Ooh, it feels so good. This is the fun part. We're stretching her out as big as we can get. Then we're gonna put more olive oil on top, cover it again with some plastic. It rests for another 30 to 40 minutes. And 15 minutes into the next rest, you wanna turn your oven on so it is 450 degrees and screaming hot, ready for when we're gonna bake. It's been a half hour, she's rested and grown. I'm going to carefully remove the plastic. The next step is called stippling, where you take your hands and you kind of play with the dough. You stipple. You sure to put little holes in there for your toppings to kind of do their thing. All right, I've got my caramelized onions, rosemary. If you don't have fresh rosemary, you could use some dried herbs if you want. You might want to just put a little olive oil on them so that they get a little moist. And I've got some olives. My oven is preheated at 450 degrees so that it's screaming hot when I put this focaccia in there. More olives. How many olives? I don't know. How many do you like? 450 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes. We're gonna check in 15 minutes. It's time to take the focaccia out. Ooh, look at that. Now I'm gonna let this rest on here for maybe 5 minutes before I cut into it. I mean, I wanna just stick my face in it right now, but I'd singe my tongue, so not a good idea. I believe she's cool enough to cut in. I wish you could smell it. I'm gonna cut right through the center so we can see the structure of the crumbs. Look at how beautiful, all airy. I'm gonna cut off a piece, and I made a little dipping sauce with my leftover onions and rosemary, and it's just got olive oil, salt, and pepper. I think I have to make this more often. MicroMangia, courageous cooking in a craft kitchen.